Half a day and good morning. The Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing is now called to order. Today is Thursday, December 30th, 2021. The time now is 9 o'clock. Welcome to everyone connected by Zoom and those tuning in via television or the YouTube channel. Thank you for your patience for accommodating the Zoom platform while we maintain social distancing mandates. Public notice for this public hearing were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on Tuesday, December 21st, and on Monday, December 27th. The agenda today, the following item, 230-36 LS as amended by the Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation and Housing, introduced by the Committee on Rules, requested by Maga'hågan, Guåhan, the governor of Guam, in accordance with the Organic Act of Guam, an act to add Article 13.3 to Chapter 1, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to adopting the implementation plan for payment for Guam World War II claims. The rules of general rules of conduct. This Zoom meeting is hosted by my staff, and we'll mute all Zoom participants until called upon. Members of the committee and non-committee members will be allowed to pose a question to an individual testifying. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by myself before speaking and begin by stating their name for record-keeping purposes. When called to speak, please ensure that you are unmuted. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or the motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violation of this general rule of conduct will result in the removal from the virtual public hearing. Please ensure that your video remains on throughout the hearing. Participants must be visible at all times and not engage in any activity during the hearing. Failure to maintain visibility may cause your removal from the meeting, the live stream. But if you're drinking, having a cup of coffee, it's 9 o'clock, or having a little snack, I have no problem. We won't remove you from the stream name. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that have joined me this morning. We have the speaker. I see Speaker Terlai. I see Senator Nelson, and I think Senator Tello's also. Oh, Senator Tello's is online also.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining this morning.
Yeah. Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, folks. This is generally a continuation of our hearing we had last week. The only amendment to the rules in front of you all is you'll find that on page 7. It specifically refers to the request by DOA that we strike out the Guam Museum. It's page 7, line 1. Strike the Guam Museum and put the director of the Department of Administration shall serve as the administrative officer of the adjudication committee. And one question that was posed by Senator Brown was that the folks that are being compensated, I don't know if that's the right word, for the atrocities that happened to our people of Guam. They asked the question, is everybody being, other than the folks that missed the deadline? And I have to remind my colleagues and advise the people of Guam that on page 2, you'll find that the compensable Guam descendant means an individual determined under section 13.302 of this chapter is to have been a resident of Guam who died as a result of an attack on the occupation of Guam by the Imperial Japanese military force during World War II, or the incident to the liberation of Guam by the United States forces, and whose death has been compensable under the Guam Meritorious Claims Act. Basically, my understanding of that, and it's law, all right, my colleagues, and for the people of Guam, it's for the folks that died during the war. It's not the folks that didn't after the war that survived. It's the folks that died. So let's just follow the law. We'll just finish up now the hearing on this rule. Mr. Burns, do you have any testimony you would like to present to the committee? And we can move along on this one, then ask my colleagues to ask any questions they may have based on what you presented based on the law that was passed, or the bill that was passed and became law. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the only thing I want to point out is that in accordance with the previous hearing, a revised bill was submitted that substituted the Director of Administration as the administrative officer for the Adjudication Committee rather than the Guam Museum, who are going to be the repository of the documents that actually evidence the payouts after they've been made. I think that's the only amendment that was made, and I think, Mr. Chairman, that's all that I have to add. But I will ask my my colleagues, I see two of them there, if they have anything to add.
Yes, and for everyone on the YouTube, I'd like to recognize Lenora Condasu and Bernie Guinness.
Bernie Guinness.
Guinness.
No, I think the director, as stated, the only changes would be the change to Department of Administration in this particular bill. And again, just to reemphasize the two who would be compensated under this particular bill, which would be the decedents, the survivors of the decedents, and then also the victim, the Guam victims.
All right, thank you. I'll begin with Madam Speaker. Do you have any questions you would like to pose to the committee, ma'am?
If you could come back to me, Mr. Chair, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Senator Nelson, ma'am, do you have any questions you would like to pose to the committee or to the folks testifying or available to testify?
No questions at this time, Mr. Chair.
All right,
I'm
thank
still
you.
trying to
Senator
review
Tello,
the
do you have any
information.
questions? All right, no problem. Thank you. Senator Tello, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm looking at online the amended version that was, I guess it's provided on the Google Drive. And I just wanted to verify to make sure this is correct. It's as amended by the Committee on General Government Operation Appropriations. This is the one we're currently looking at. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. There was a question I had with regards to a deadline. You know, when will this stop? Is there anything that was incorporated into the amendments of this new amended version to incorporating a deadline?
Just looking at the document, if you look on page 5,
Okay.
the filing period for claims, it's on page 5, line 3. 3 months of the date which the adjudication committee publishes the notice described. So I'm going to ask Ed, Mr. Bernie, maybe you might want to answer that, because when you guys start getting this moving, then the clock starts. I mean, I don't want to say it's 3 months from the day when it's when you guys are ready to roll. And we want to make sure that the people of Guam, the survivors, at least know this, and then they know where to go and what to do. All right, Ed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's very important to communicate all this, and we will obviously do our utmost to make sure, as indeed with all the programs that we've been trying to roll out, to make sure that all the potential claimants of this program, as with others, are aware of the requirements to make a claim. As the chairman said, section 13303, which was not amended but was included in the original bill, it says there's two parts. A, an individual filing a claim for payment under 13302 shall file such claim no later than 3 months, so that's the deadline, after the date on which the adjudication committee publishes the notice described in subsection B. And subsection B goes on to say, not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of this act, the adjudication committee shall publish a notice of the deadline for filing a claim described in subsection A. So the way it's written is that 30 days after the enactment, the adjudication committee shall publish a notice of the deadline, and the deadline is no later than 3 months after the date of such publication.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns, can you tell me when this first started on the, at the very beginning of the war claims, what was the time period for individuals to fill out their application and turn it in? What timeline were they given?
I actually don't remember. Leo, do you remember what the schedule was?
I don't remember. I know that when we opened it up initially in January, at least to start receiving those who was given a decision. I think the program ran for about 2 months and for us to intake, but I don't remember specific timelines.
I think the program was impacted by the fact that we had to get the correct amount of paperwork, including the information from the US Treasury. So that dragged it on a little bit. I know that the center was open for about 6 weeks, but we continued to receive claims after that point.
Okay, I guess what I'm talking about is not the one that the governor initiated, to pay upfront, these war claims. I'm talking about the whole Adjudication Act from the very beginning of Congress and allowing, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, it was 2016, they can start filling out these applications, and the deadline was 2018.
That's correct.
Okay, so you're looking at, much longer, the federal government providing that leeway, much longer. So 16, 17, 18, almost 2 years to do that. And here, this bill is only allowing, 3 months? Yeah, only 3 months. This is very short. I mean, I think, Mr.
Senator
Chair,
Tello?
Yes, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if anything,
No,
I think that.
I agree with you, Senator Tello.
Okay.
The period is too short, 3 months.
Yeah.
But I honestly believe that Department administration is working on the bill that was passed. And I think it'll be in our best interest, our colleagues, that after we end this year, we come up with an amendment to this bill to extend it from the 3 months to longer. And I agree with you. We need to make it maybe 12 months or something so everybody can get their paperwork together and then we can get this done right. Because to actually force DOA within 3 months and then say that they failed to do it, it'll be wrong because they're just following the law. And I agree with you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you for that. And go ahead, Mr. Byrne, please.
I also would suggest that it's not a bad thing if we were to extend it. I think the shorter period was driven by the fact that the assessment by the administration was that there were fewer claimants in this category because there were just a few left, rather than the number of claimants under the original legislation, which included a much larger population. But certainly I would be quite happy to have the filing period extended if the legislature so wished.
Yeah, and it was brought up in the last meeting that the 700 amount was basically just, wasn't an accurate amount of individuals who missed the deadline. It was just a number they pulled out based on some signatures that was petitioned. So I think we may be, finding out there's more than 700 and a lot more individuals to look in. So I think, Mr. Chair, it wouldn't, I think by changing it now in this legislation, once this ball gets rolling and this bill is passed, the rules and regs, I think it's so important that we start from the very beginning, the accurate amount of time it would take for them to provide their applications, fill out the applications and submit it. So I look forward, if this bill gets on the floor, to actually change that 3 months to maybe a year right off the bat. So that, and like I said, as we start this process, let's not, go ahead, Mr. Byrne, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would point out though, Senator, that that in order to start paying out descendants, we would have to clear all the people who were entitled to payment under the survivor category. So that would delay any payment to descendants as we leave it open for survivors. So the legislature would have to balance between those two issues.
Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, that section on line 3, 13.303, filing period for claims and notice, an individual filing a claim for a payment under 13.302 shall file such claim not later than 3 months after the date on which the adjudication committee publishes the first, well, basically the notice described in section B. So, you know, I think that needs to be changed, but I'm sure we can get legal to look at that to ensure that what I'm trying to do is allow a little more time. And that's it. Well, other than that, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Byrne, and your staff as well for all their hard work on this piece of legislation and the opportunity again to have another public hearing for any concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Tello. And you know what? I would check with legal to make sure we're in line, but maybe, or what I would recommend is that I believe Mr. Byrne will probably support this to a certain extent. We put a notwithstanding specifically to that line, the 3 months to be 12 months, but we need to probably word it so that the survivors are not delayed because the decedent is still processing. But at least we can get things moving. We need to just word it right where it just works its way and everybody that's ready can start processing. And then everybody else, you got 12 months, and then after that, it's cut off and it's over, and we move on. And then we figure that out then when things come up, right, Senator Tello? What would you agree to that?
It sounds right. Looking forward to legal's comments too on it, just to provide
Yes.
that extra leeway. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no
All
more
right.
questions at
Thank
this
you.
time.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, do you have anything now? Because there's only you and I think Senator Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Senator Brown will be coming on shortly.
Okay, so yeah, yes, thank you very much. And just to clarify, so this bill removes the Guam Museum completely out of the picture and all the claims will be processed by Department of Administration. Is that correct?
Yes, well, part of what you said, Madam Speaker, is correct. The Department of Administration will act as the administrative officer for the adjudication committee. The responsibility for adjudicating these claims is the responsibility of the adjudicating committee, and Department of Administration is the, if you like, the staffing department for that committee. The claims, when processed, are to be archived at the Guam Museum. And I think we discussed that at the last hearing.
Yes, and I had asked the Department of Chamorro Affairs who was here representing the museum at that time for a plan of how they were going to treat these, whether they were going to be confidential or not, but I don't see him here today. I think that's important because according to the plan that we have, that was attached to the draft bill from the governor, it looks like, and according to your claim statement, it looks like all the documents are intended to be public documents and so that they will be releasable. And that's not how the federal government had treated them. They had treated the claim forms as confidential. And so we had discussed this at great length at the last hearing, but I don't see any changes to this amended bill to change that confidentiality or to make it consistent with how the federal government had treated as the claim forms. Now, I understand that you also are intending that the judgments be published. And, you know, we can see from the federal government's website, they don't put the names and then the amounts, they put numbers and things like this. But according to what I can gather from this amended bill and the plan that we're supposedly adopting together with the bill, it looks different than how the federal government has treated, you know, names and confidentiality of the awards.
What you just said is quite correct. I think we probably need to have both our legal teams look at the difference between the Guam FOIA laws and the federal FOIA laws to make sure that we don't run afoul of the Guam FOIA laws in keeping these confidential. But if the aim is to follow the federal guidelines and keep the names and the supporting documents, and those documents are the documents that contain some of the harrowing details confidential. That's correct.
Right. Okay. So yeah, those changes have not been made, and I asked for a proposal from Department of Chamorro Affairs at that time. I'm going to ask you then, Mr. Byrne, for some proposals as to what to change here. And particularly the claims form has a disclaimer. Our local claims form that you've attached to this bill says that they are waiving that all of this information will be public. So I think that's a very important part that has to be resolved. And if you are advocating all these be public, and if you could explain why, and why, why do we need to do that versus what the federal government had done in processing claims? And the other thing then is, okay, so, we had talked about the attachment again, exhibit, it's the implementation plan schedule, where it pretty much lays out who's doing what. The adjudication committee makes the determination, but then I had raised the point at the last hearing, but I don't see any changes in this amended bill to address this point, and that is according to 2.3 of the implementation schedule, it says upon satisfaction by the employees benefits branch of DOA, claims will be forwarded to Division of Accounts for processing payments. Any claims not meeting the secondary review will be returned to the committee for further action. And I had questioned, why does the Department of Administration get to do a secondary review of claims that are being adjudicated by a different body, right? And it says that Employee Benefits Branch will serve as secondary reviewer of all approved claims forwarded by the committee. I think they should be not a secondary reviewer, but simply a processor of what the adjudication committee has decided.
When you raise that, I'm going to ask Leo and Bernie to address that in a minute. But when you raise that point, Madam Speaker, I think I noted that in the claims that we processed in January of 2 years ago, whereas there were in certain certain claimants, the adjudication was not in doubt, but the supporting documents were in doubt, and it was that in particular that the Department of Administration personnel was engaged in making sure that the supporting documents, mistakes get made all over the place, that the supporting documents not only supported the claim, but were consistent with the claim. And we had some issues with how beneficiaries were treated. And if you want further details on that, I can ask.
Well, I don't. I'm concerned that we have an adjudication committee. It's their job to address all the issues that you're just describing here, whether that it's their job specifically by law to determine that the supporting documents have been submitted, to determine that the correct beneficiaries have been named, to determine all of those things, and to forward to Department of Administration for processing the awards, and not for Department of Administration to review the awards and do another, adjudication of those awards. That's what I don't want. And so that's what's not clear to me in 2.3. It says secondary reviewer of all approved claims. And so, yeah, I had asked that be, that you guys come back with some other language, especially now that you are assisting the committee. If you are the administrator for the adjudication committee now, then there should be no reason why the adjudication committee is making approvals of claims without supporting documents, without, with incorrect beneficiaries and that type of thing. So I think when say make an approval of a claim, that should stand, and there should be nothing like this 2.3 that says someone else gets to override that adjudication committee. that's my concern, is who has the last say, and it should be the adjudication committee. They are approving the claims or not approving the claims. And then finally, so the bill does not make any amendment. The amended bill, we're here for another hearing because there's an amended bill which only makes one change, and that is from Guam Museum to the Department of Administration as the administrative officer. But it makes no change in this bill to the confidentiality or the funding source. So, we had talked again, the original bill that passed to allow for local processing of war claims, it cited very specifically that the monies reimbursed by the United States Department of Treasury for the implementation of Public Law 35-61, that was done, about a year ago, that reimbursement money shall remain in said fund and authorized to be expended for the payment of war claims under U.S. Public Law 114-328 to claimants who missed the 1-year filing deadline. That was the intended source of funding. And then they also put, so this is substitute bill 217-36. They also put B, should such funds be insufficient, the governor's authorized to transfer for these purposes, right? But this new bill that we are now addressing that came from the governor does not follow that original funding source. And it's saying it's going to come from the general fund. And it doesn't specify, it just says the general fund. But we already know that supposedly in our budget, we've appropriated all the revenue that we've predicted. And we haven't made any amendments yet to those revenue projections. And so this additional appropriation would exceed, if we say it's coming from the FY22 general fund revenues, it would exceed the revenue that we've projected. And I know you said it doesn't matter, it's a separate bill, we don't need to balance our budget at this point, but I just don't agree with that. I think we should be acting within our means, and so we should document if we think our revenues are greater. That should be documented and reflected somewhere. And if there's a reason why the governor could not use her transfer authority to fund this, could you just explain that, Mr. Byrne? The original authorization was for the governor to use transfer authority to fund this, transfer authority from general fund. Is there a reason why you departed from that, or why you're proposing to depart from that in this new bill?
Yes, you wrapped up about 3 questions in that question, Madam Speaker. The first issue, and the second issue we've discussed before. The way the accounting works is the monies were paid out of that original fund that was set up for war claims, and when the monies came in, the monies had to be deposited back in that fund. Otherwise, that fund would have reported a deficit, and the general fund, which I repeat several times, the general fund would have had to make up that deficit.
But what you're describing is contrary. That's a different issue that but what you're describing is contrary to the law that was in place that said money's coming back from the federal government to reimburse, we're going to remain in this fund. And you're saying you didn't do that. So I understand, you've said that before. You didn't comply with keeping that money into this fund as was intended by the original law. And we're trying to pass another war claims law here. And we don't want, our laws to be bypassed. So I want the language to be reflective of what we can accomplish and what we are agreeing here between the administration and the executive branch and the legislature to accomplish. So what was
I would like to
bypassing the transfer authority?
I would like to just ask the legislature.
Let's hold on, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Byrne, the question is the transfer authority. Why are we not using the transfer authority?
Madam Speaker, stand by, please. Ed, hold on. Folks, the bill we're hearing today is a bill that was generated based on the law that was passed. That's all this is.
That's right, Mr. Chair, but it's different. This law changes the law that was passed, and instead of using the funding sources that were dictated by the law that was passed, it is proposing to change the funding sources to a totally different funding source. And that's why I'm asking Mr. Burns why we are bypassing the original law that said it's going to come from the reimbursement money or it's going to come from transfer authority.
Are you saying that this bill that was generated because of a bill that was passed in November is contrary to each other? Is that what you're stating?
They have different funding sources, yes.
Okay.
And so that's my question, yes.
Okay. One of the things we need to keep in mind, my colleagues, I'd like to also recognize Senator Brown has also joined us, Senator Guåhan, Senator Ada. As we're moving along in this hearing on this bill, please understand that, Madam Speaker, you're going to have to call an emergency session by the 7th to hear this. All right.
Mr. Chair, we will have to discuss that because I don't think that that is a viable solution.
No, I understand that. And that's why, my colleagues, I want to just remind everyone, last week I asked for any amendments so we could have amended this and made it okay and not discuss it because the clock is ticking totally against all of us. All right, so let's just make sure we understand that very clearly. Last week, Senator Brown asked a question.
Mr. Chair.
And we're going to move on. Okay, so go ahead, Madam Speaker, and then we're going to move to the next colleague because the clock is ticking.
I have 2 questions left. One is the transfer authority, which I've already asked. Mr. Byrne, if you could just specify why we are not using any of the funding sources that were dictated by the original bill, and why we are proposing now this new language for funding sources. Why are you not able to use transfer authority to fund the war claims?
Madam Speaker, have you finished asking your question?
That's my question, Mr. Byrne. You know,
have you finished answering your question? So I'm
asking, my question is why is the administration proposing not to use the transfer authority or the reimbursed funds that was mandated by the original law that we are discussing here, and they are now proposing in this new bill a different funding source?
Madam Speaker, I wasn't asking you to repeat the question. I was just asking whether you finished asking the question.
Well, Mr. Byrne, are you able to answer the question?
I would be happy to do so if you would give me the opportunity.
Please answer the question.
Okay. I would ask the legislature very seriously not to make laws that that make nonsense of accounting conventions.
Is that a no, Mr. Byrne?
I explained just now, right, that the way the law was written, and I think it's been explained before. You may not agree with the answer, but it was explained before that the way the law was written, there would have been a deficit in that special fund. And as we all know, deficits in special funds have to be made up with money from the general fund. That's just how accounting works. And it will never change. Right? We can never, please let me finish, Madam Speaker. We will never be able to continue to report deficits in general funds. Our auditors would be all over us if we tried to do that. When we have a deficit in the general fund and we make it up with funds from special funds, then the legislature finds fault with that. So please understand there's an accounting reality here. The money came in from the federal government and it balanced the money that went out.
And it was removed from the special fund that it was supposed to remain in. We know that. So I'm asking you about the transfer authority, Mr. Byrne, the second.
Please let me finish answering the first part of the question. May I?
No, can you please just answer the funding source, because the chair is going to cut me off soon on the time. And Mr. Chair, I would ask that Mr. Byrne be directed to answer the question. Just the question is, why are we now departing from the transfer authority, the second funding source in the original law?
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to answer the first question,
Yes.
Yeah, you
Okay.
said that the money was
Okay.
taken out. The reimbursed money from the feds
Money-
has been used. You've taken it out contrary to what the law said it was going to happen to it. That's clear.
Madam Speaker,
But
it
the
wasn't taken
second
out,
part
it was
is
put
regarding
in.
the transfer authority. Pardon?
Madam Speaker, it wasn't taken out, it was put in, as I've just tried to explain. Now, why the governor did not use her transfer authority is a matter, that's the governor's discretion. I can't answer that question. Although I know the governor's transfer authority, only extends to the way the budget law is written. It only extends to the available funding that's available for transfer. And if there wasn't funding, and I don't really recall at this stage because it's 2 years ago, if there wasn't available funding for transfer, there would have been nothing. There would have been nothing to pay.
I apologize, Mr. Byrne. I think you misunderstand the question. I'm talking about the bill 217 that just passed, where the funding source for the war claims, our new war claims local program, was supposed to be the governor's transfer authority. I'm not talking about anything from years ago. I'm talking about this new bill that just passed in November, as you said. Bill 217 authorized the governor to use transfer authority and to fund this program. And so my question is, now we have a new bill suggesting a different funding source. And I want to know why the transfer authority was not sufficient to fund this program.
Well,
this is a new transfer authority. There's no limit on it. There was no limit on it in Bill 217.
No, the limit is, may I be clear, the limit is the available funds. And my colleague, the director of BBMR, I think often responds to you that we cannot determine what the transfer, it's not the transfer authority, what the transfer availability of funds is until the end of the year. So if that would inevitably result in none of these being paid out until the end of the year. And that is the reason why the administration framed the bill in this way.
Are you telling me, Mr. Byrne, that the governor cannot use her transfer authority until the end of the year?
I think Mr. Carlson.
That's the first I've ever heard anything like that. That is
no, Madam Speaker, it's not that she cannot use it, but she cannot know what the transferability of funds is until the end of the year. Mr. Carlson has often said that.
But you want me to pull out all the examples of transfer authorities that have occurred throughout the years, in the middle of the years, at the beginning of the years, and all sorts of times throughout the years, Mr. Byrne? I mean, okay, I'm not going to argue with you because I'm
not aware of any.
Pretty silly that we're going to say now the governor cannot use her transfer authority until the end of the year when we've seen her use her transfer authority throughout the years. So we're not getting a real answer as to why we're changing funding source from transfer authority to now general fund without increase our revenue projection of the general fund. And the last time, Mr. Chair, we tried to get a very clear answer as to exactly how much is left in the general fund balance versus the general fund revenue projections that might exceed, or revenue that might exceed our projections. And as you know, that was also a difficult conversation. But, Mr. Byrne, we're just trying to make this program clear without glitches. And I would appreciate, just straightforward answers to the questions. And Mr. Chair, with that.
Madam Speaker, I believe you have them.
Byrne, I didn't ask any question right now. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's see. Senator Nelson, did you have any questions to ask? You're still reviewing the document.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the same concern as the speaker, Mr. Chair, and maybe perhaps the people that are watching, we're not being very specific on what we're really talking about. So the Bill 217 authorizes And this is a caveat to Bill 17. The bill that we are reviewing now is Bill 230-36. And so this is Bill 230-36 is a caveat to Bill 217. And in Bill 217, it states that the Maga'hågan Guåhan is authorized to transfer such sums as may be available for the purposes outlined in section 3.202 in this article. And then we're looking at the funding source of 230-36. And the funding source is now saying that we are going to take $10 million, notwithstanding any other provision of law, which means this negates the Bill 217, where it gives the governor the transfer authority. It says now that we are going to take $10 million, which is appropriated from the general fund to the Department of Administration. So I don't know, Mr. Byrne, if perhaps I'm asking the same question, is how did we go to negating the authorization of the transfer authority in Bill 217 to what is now the sum of $10 million in Bill 230? Is that clear? Can you answer the question, Mr. Byrne?
Ed, can you answer that one, Bert?
Because I was a little also confused.
I'm
in
sorry,
you were explaining it.
I was muted and not by me, so I was unclear when to speak and when not to speak. But I will now attempt to answer your question. But can I just be clear? This is really important. There's a difference between transfer authority and available funds to transfer. Nobody is negating the governor's transfer authority. But in order to determine what the funds are to transfer, you have to be a little bit more judicious than just use that formula of words. And we have in practice, and I would look forward to the speaker giving me information that contradicts that, because I don't have it, in almost every case, because the information is actually reported to the legislature. BBMR reports what funds have been transferred between accounts that represent the government's transfer under her authority. And it doesn't happen until after the end of the year.
Yes, and
this bill, Senator, is the administration's bill, and it's an attempt to try and make sure that these claims are paid out as smoothly and as quickly as possible. And I don't believe it would have been the case under the previous law. And so this is an attempt to make sure that it happens. And I think that's a good concept. So I'm kind of a little puzzled as to why it's being deemed so reprehensible, when all we're trying to do is to pay out this funding. As I say, the general fund is the catch-all fund, and it's coming out of the general fund. And there's nothing more mysterious about it than that.
well, as you define as reprehensible, it's just it's a simple question to connect the dots, because we don't understand it. There's no reference of 217. So on the surface, if I was to look at this bill, I would have never known, if I was not in this job, that there was a somehow connection between the two. And so we're just trying to make it transparent for the people of Guam. And so this $10 million from the general fund, where is that coming from? Is that coming from 2021?
I think I answered that question at the last hearing.
Sure, but now you can answer it again.
Mr. Chairman, I answered it once before. Well, actually 3 times before.
Okay, well, we're in a different hearing, so please answer the question. Mr. Chair, can you please direct him to answer the question?
Ed, can you go and just repeat the answer where the 10 minutes coming from?
I will repeat the answer as succinctly as I can.
Thank you.
That we are now hopefully about to end the first quarter of the financial year 2022. 2021, as I explained, there was an excess of revenues over the budgeted revenues, which amounted to over 60 million. the Department of Administration accounting section wants to recognize that there are some liabilities not previously recognized in the financial statements for a number of reasons. The deficits in the special funds, to which I referred to earlier, must be a charge on the general fund. We cannot have a special fund with a deficit. And indeed, in cases where we do, and this was, this is the case with, in particular, the Tourist Attraction Fund and the Customs and Quarantine Fund, where we have to make some adjustments in order to make sure that the sums of money that are due to the different agencies under that are in fact paid, and it has to come out of the general fund. And I also mentioned, and I hope this comment does drive home, is that continuing appropriations, which has been built in to almost every department under the current budget law, creates an obligation without any catch. So the surplus of revenues has to be reduced by our assessment of what the effect of those continuing obligations are. Having done that, we are left with a balance of unappropriated, available funding, which I responded to the speaker when she asked me, amounted to an estimate of $20 million. I haven't any reason to revise that estimate at this time, but it is subject to revision as we complete our financial statements. In addition to that, a few days ago, you were in receipt of the November CRER, which reported a potential excess of revenues over the budgeted revenues for 2022. The administration indicated that that might be the case when we were discussing the budget, and that will end up in the unappropriated balance of the general fund. So when asked, I confirmed that there is sufficient funding in the general fund to be able to pay out these claims. I went on to say that there are a number of other bills promoted by the legislature, presumably in the full knowledge that there is limited funding. So, I'm kind of puzzled by this duality of approach to it. But all these bills that are promoted by the legislature also want to use the funding from the general fund. And I think the fiscal note, which BBMR attached to this bill, indicated that there was a potential of the total of these bills of 121 million. That is obviously a very difficult figure to deal with. But if you give priority to this one, and the purpose of this bill is to give it priority, then when asked, I would confirm that there is sufficient funding to pay for this bill. That is the burden of what I said, and I hope that you'll agree that I summarized it similarly to the way I did before.
Yeah, then I was hoping you'd come up with a different answer, Mr. Byrne, because it's kind of like you lost me at like 10 different mirrors and smoke screens behind that. But in any case, Mr. Byrne, Mr. Chair, I do have a question. It was, or perhaps maybe you can answer this, Mr. Byrne. We were talking about federal funds being put into a certain fund, and it's in that fund, and then one of my colleagues mentioned that it was removed from that fund. Can we be more succinct and specific to what was put into which fund and where that originated from?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, Senator.
You stated it wasn't taken out, it was put in.
Yeah.
So what is this it, and where was it put in?
I guess you have to be fully aware of the context.
Yes,
my
and that's
understanding-
what we're here to do for the people of Guam.
And you're asking my understanding of the context, because that was a
Yes.
question. That was a question from the speaker.
And then you stated those words.
My understanding of the question was that where the original war claims bill from 2 years ago created a special fund for the payment of those war claims, and government of Guam advanced the funds in order that the claimants and the survivors got paid out as quickly as possible. We advanced those funds in the expectation that we were going to be reimbursed by US Treasury for the amounts that we paid out. So if we paid them out of that special fund, so that special fund had an overdraft, if you like.
What is the name of the special fund, Mr. Byrne?
I don't recall. It's like maybe Leah remembers. It's the war. It had a very long name, I remember, but it's the fund that was created by the act that paid out the original war claims.
The Guam War Claims Fund.
Okay.
Thank you, Speaker.
That sounds not so. I must have misremembered.
That's what it's called, Mr. Byrne. Yeah.
So that was my understanding, Senator, of the question, and that was my answer.
Okay, and Gov Guam advanced the funds. Where did they get the money to advance the funds?
From the general fund. As I say, the general fund always has to step in.
And how much did they advance in the general fund?
The total amount that was paid out.
From the general fund?
The total amount that was paid out was 12.8 million, which we got reimbursed, if I remember correctly, in 2 tranches, round about 10 million, and then the balance came a bit later.
What was the balance? The 2.8 specifically?
2.8. Yeah, I don't remember the exact sums, but that was the order of it.
So does that 12.8 million still reside in the War Claims Fund?
No, because it wasn't in the War Claims Fund had a money going out and money going in, so it has no balance now.
Okay, how are you able to move the money going in and the money going out?
How?
How?
What do you
Why
mean
does
how?
he ask you how? How are you able to remove the money from the War Claims Fund, the money that was going in and the money that was going out? How were you able to move that money out?
The money, it wasn't out, it went in, as I was trying to explain.
Yeah, and I asked you if there's any more money in there, and you said there's no more money in there.
There's no more money because what was paid out and was owed to the general fund was paid back. So
Into the War
it
Claims
had an
Fund.
overdraft. It had an overdraft, and the overdraft was satisfied by the money coming in from the federal government.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. But really, technically, legislatively, if there is money sitting in a fund, the only person that's authorized to move that money around, from my understanding, is the legislature. And so if we're thinking that because we used money out of the general fund to advance the war claims payment, and then the 12.8 came and dropped into the War Claims Fund, which is a special fund, that should have been the legislature's authority to move. So now that money doesn't exist. And so that's where we're trying to understand also, Mr. Chair, how that money was moved unilaterally without anyone knowing. And so to my next question, Mr. Chair, would be, and this is my last question, thank you for bearing with me. How much money was given or reimbursed by the US Treasury? How much money was given for the war claims by the US Treasury? Was it only 12.8 million or was there more?
No, it was 12.8 million.
And that's it.
And had that money not been reimbursed.
Is it only 12.8 million, or is there more money from the US Treasury
No.
that was given specifically for the war claims?
There was 12.8 million was
Okay,
the amount that was reimbursed.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Chair.
Had it not been so, had it not been reimbursed, the general fund would have had 12.8 million less money in it than it does now.
Right, and the governor made that decision to act in that manner. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Brown. do you have any questions? Because I know you asked a question last hearing about the descendant being compensated, and that's part of the law to be
Yeah, I mean,
compensated.
not so much question at this point, Mr. Chairman. I mean, my views with regards to this bill have not changed. I think that, you know, to move forward, I mean, we sent essentially a bill to the governor, which was signed to essentially put in place the process, the implementation process to address how we're going to pay out the remaining war survivors. As we acknowledge, there are, you know, we don't know the exact number. It was estimated about 700 potential war survivors out there that did not meet the 1-year deadline that was imposed by the federal government. And certainly we want to prioritize to make sure that we reach out and compensate those war survivors while they're still here, because we recognize and understand it's been so many years, obviously, since compensation has been properly addressed. And we want to make sure that we get to them. But including all these other things in this bill that's coming back to us, which I think extend beyond the boundaries, as the speaker had mentioned at the last hearing last week, and again is still here beyond really what was intended, which is what we wanted to see was what the implementation plan would be to execute to address those remaining survivors. And I fear that if we continue down this road, we're going to end up with so much controversy that we're not going to be able to reach out and get to those survivors before time literally does run out. I still maintain my position, Mr. Chair, with regards to the source of funding. I still find it very problematic that we as members of this community and descendants of those that were victimized during the war are literally being asked to compensate our own people. Our own people are being asked to compensate themselves with regards to the source of funding that was here. You know, of course, originally when Congress passed the legislation and the Section 30 money was used as a source of funding, we weren't happy about that either, because that was money that was obviously intended for our community. But at the same time, that was a little more palatable because at least that funding was coming from a federal source to pay our people. But to put the general fund down again as a source to do that, and now we want to expand with regards to language contained in this bill to address the heirs of those that suffered during the war, which compensates probably most members, if not all members of the Guam legislature will be able to say, I have a family member that actually had lived through the war, had suffered, survived, but unfortunately did not live long enough to see this day. I think we can all say that. But again, I'm very bothered by the expectation that we are expected to pay our own people with their own money. That does not bring recognition of what our people suffered from the proper source, which is the federal government. If we were looking at Section 30 money that's from a federal hand to our hand, then maybe I would consider it, but we're not looking at that at all. And I just think you cannot ask for justice and proper recognition of the suffering of our people. And I certainly cannot, as an heir, say that I have any understanding whatsoever of what my family, what my grandparents suffered, what my aunts and uncles that were alive during that time suffered. I cannot even begin to have any comprehension of that. Least of all to even want a penny of any money that would have been due to them, because I cannot, nor can we, nor can the legislature, nor can the governor of Guam give our people that have since passed away this recognition. We cannot compensate them anymore. They're in God's hands. That's beyond us. But to continue to move forward with the expectation that our own people, out of money that's intended for our people today that are living now, our people that are still victimized in this community, maybe not from imperial forces, but nevertheless are victimized within their own community, who are harmed, who are murdered, who are raped. And yet we cannot provide enough resources now in this community today to protect our people. We're being asked to take the money off the table that they need for those critical needs in our community and pay our own people with their own money. And that, to me, I cannot support. As much as I recognize the suffering of our people, Mr. Chair, I work with many of these survivors that are no longer alive today. I staffed the commission back in 1990 that went to Congress to testify on Congressman Ben Blas's bill to address compensation. None of those members of the panel are alive today. To Pete Cruz, the former Mayor Bernardo of Joltnia, Beatrice Emsley, who we all know her story of suffering, of what she went through. These manangko that I staffed as a very young person who served as the executive director of the Guam War Reparations Commission, to staff them in Congress to provide their testimony, are no longer with us. I've attended every single funeral of them. And I know even now we cannot bring them justice for what they suffered. But to look at this and expect our people to pay themselves, this is not recognition. This is not acknowledgement from the federal government that essentially absolved the government of Japan from their responsibilities and their duties to address proper and due just compensation to our people. So with that, Mr. Chair, I really have no further comment. I'll reserve that if this bill moves forward on the floor of the Guam legislature. But I'm asking my colleagues, seriously think about what we're doing here. Because if we're simply looking at paying out money for the sake of paying out money, that's not what this should be. This is many steps above that. And we need to make sure that when we do this, we're doing it the right way. We're doing it the moral way to ensure that our people are compensated, but not through this process, not through taking money off the table of our children. And even the manangko in our community, Mr. Chair, that lived through the war, that have fear of living in their own homes because they don't feel safe in this community. Because they can't guarantee if they pick up the phone to call that they're going to get the Guam police at their door to help them or protect them or patrol their villages. They're still being harmed now. And what are we doing about it? We want to say, oh, look, we paid our people for their suffering and their sacrifice, but we're not doing it the right way. And to ask them to pay themselves, this is unimaginable. That we would ask our own people to pay themselves for the suffering that was brought upon them. So with that, Mr. Chair, the current version of this bill as it's written, unfortunately, if it continues on this, I just can't support it. And I have no further comment on this bill. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Blas, Frank, do you have anything, Senator Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I was listening intently and I do share the same concerns as the speaker and Senator Nelson with regard to the change in the funding source. What my struggle here is that the bill that was sent and the law that was signed was specific in as far as the funding source and what it was going to do. And so now to have a bill that actually changes the funding source, and albeit, Mr. Byrne, thank you for the attempt to be able to try to explain it. It still gives us that the conundrum or that concern as to whether or not it can be done, despite what the law says on this thing. So, while we're listening here, Mr. Chair, I'm actually doing the research on finding out. Okay, the bill says A. The law says A, the bill says D, B and C is missing. I'm just trying to fill the gaps here. So I'm having the difficulty, and I'm going to continue to listen to the conversations with regard to this. I also share in the passion, and the discuss as shared by my good colleague from Pago Bay, or Senator Brown. As you know, Mr. Chair, I've been an advocate for this for many years, going on a couple of decades already, and I was never comfortable with the funding source that was used initially. I was part of that legislature where we were informed by then our congressional representative then that the utilization of the language saying Section 30 was just a placeholder, and that there was going to be discussions about using another funding source. That was never the case, and we had to move forward with it. And I'm very, it's you want to be able to pay the survivors. They've got nothing to do with where the funding source is coming from. That's not their concern. Their concern is wanting to get the recognition, the compensation. But the concern that we should have as lawmakers is to recognize that already millions of dollars that should have been going towards infrastructure improvements, towards public safety, towards making sure we have more police officers, more firefighters, more nurses, went to pay for a debt that really wasn't ours. It wasn't our debt, and it should not. It should continue not to be our debt. But then we're caught again now in here again. Tan Maria, who's now waiting for this opportunity because she missed out on this in that opportunity to be able to submit her claims in a timely manner. This gives her now that opportunity for closure. Doesn't matter to her as to where it's coming from, but it should matter to us because, again, as was stated by Senator Brown, it's morally wrong for what the United States has led us to do, and that's a struggle that I have within me. Is I want to be able to move forward on this so that we can provide this manamku, this generation, that opportunity for, in this case, the compensation. However, now it's taking away from, and from what we're understanding here is, and Mr. Byrne, I can recognize some of the concept in as far as basic accounting. It's taking away from the general fund, but then what fund, what services, what operations are we taking that away from in the midst of hoping that it's going to get, we're going to somehow, we're going to be able to bring the monies back into this. And, if it is in fact true that, none of the transfers can happen until, the end of the fiscal year, people are expecting that this bill is going to get passed next week, and then they can start, processing their paperwork, in a couple weeks. Not afford to wait until the end of the fiscal year. So there are many struggles still that I have, Mr. Speaker, with regard to this. I'm still going to look at whether or not, we can go from, again, what was in the law, the funding source, and do what is the bill going to say what the funding source is now. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator, have any comments or questions you'd like to pose, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The questions were asked and answered. Well, not directly answered, but they were answered. And hopefully, we'll be able to get over this hurdle and come out to some type of compromise that will be amenable to both sides and to everyone. And let's just hope for the best. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Parrish, welcome. Ma'am, do you have any questions or comments you'd like to make?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone here today. So I'm looking over the amended bill, and I think from the last hearing, my concern about the appeals process, the fact that the appeals process is made by the same body that adjudicated the claim. I feel that there should be another layer, perhaps a hearing officer even, should there be some appeals that is done. So I think that could be adjusted. I do share many sentiments of my colleagues here today regarding what is true justice, right? We're paying our own war survivors, and really it's the responsibility of the countries that were at war to really address this, and it's way overdue. We are missing also a larger portion of the population. We still haven't fully addressed the war claim survivors or war survivors in totality, and so there are definitely some loopholes in all of this, and I think incrementally we need to get this addressed. This perhaps is just one step. We need to, resolve a lot of these issues so that those that are living today can receive some closure on this. And so, I'm in support of incremental measures, but at the same time, what is the long-term vision for this? What is the long-term cure for those that have suffered from the war? And ultimately, I'm also believe that we must do, in honor of those war survivors, we must do all we can to prevent war, any future war from happening. And, that should guide a lot of our actions here in legislature. As leaders of this island, it's so important that we make these decisions in honor of our ancestors. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Paris.
Mr. Chair, I just have a quick question.
Okay, we'll make it quick. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think this might simplify. I just questioned to Mr. Burns, and Mr. Burns, if you can, shorten it by just answering yes or no. Did the governor put any kind of did the governor transfer funding into the 75th Guam Liberation War Claims Fund that was created in the 35th Guam Legislature, Public Law 35-61? Did the governor transfer any funding into that particular fund? Yes or no? Oh, I can't, you're muted, sir. You're muted.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, yes. How much money was transferred into that fund?
12.
Okay.
But can I just speak? There was
just real quick. Let me get to where I'm going to. Let me get to where I'm going to. The question was, yes,
I must qualify what I just said.
Okay.
It was a small amount withheld by the federal government. I think it was the order, Leo, I think it was like $60,000 relating to repayment of federal debts, which we didn't get repaid. Okay, I just want to be clear. I want to be absolutely precise. Right?
So the administration, the governor used her transfer authority to transfer 12.6 million based on Public Law 35-61, which is the 75th Guam Liberation Wars Claim Fund. Then you, Mr. Byrne, paid out those expedited adjudicated claims before the federal government was able, and you paid those out. How much funding did you pay out to those expedited adjudicated claims that the governor paid out?
12.8 million.
Okay, so you did pay it out and from the account, and leaving a balance into that account of about.
Now it's zero.
It's zero. Okay, Mr. Chair, that's the question. Everyone was talking about the fund, and that if there was any funding in there left over, that the legislature has the authority to appropriate that, not the administration, because once that money is placed into that account. But then my last question would be, the federal government then reimbursed the government of Guam for that 12.5 that they had paid out. Okay, so the reimbursement based on 35-61 says that that funding from the federal government was supposed to be placed into the 75th Guam Liberation War Claims Fund. Where did that money come when it was reimbursed by the federal government?
It was placed into that fund, as you just said.
Okay, so then that fund should have $12.5 million, Mr. Burns, in there, because once it's in there, it's a lockbox. Bill 35-61 clearly states that once that money is reimbursed back into that particular fund, you have no authority whatsoever to take money out for anything else. Whether you want to reimburse an account that you took money out to put into that account, that's a different story. But Mr. Chair, that's what I wanted to ask Mr. Burns, because you had no authority to take out that refund, the reimbursement from the federal government that was placed into the 75th Guam Liberation War Claims Fund. But it's obvious you did, because you're saying there's zero in there. So you must have taken that money out without our authority to do so.
No, Senator. The money was taken out before we got reimbursed by the federal government. Had we not done that, the War Claims Fund Bill, or Act, I should say, authorized the payment of the war claims. The money came out of the fund, and therefore the fund owed the general fund 12.8 million. Um,
Mr. Burns,
that
if
the
you
money
look
was
at
just replaced in that fund,
Yeah.
and that's
And
why
if you
there's a
look at
zero
Public Law
balance.
35-30, if you look at Public Law 35-61, it's very clear. It's very clear. The administration is to transfer money into this account. This account
Yes,
then is
and it was
used.
done.
Right, it was used. And then any reimbursement for that money that was paid out from the federal government shall go into this account. And that account has only the legislature's authority to appropriate, not the administration. Please read Public Law 35-61. It's very clear, Mr. Byrne, and very clear to me, and that was my intention when I voted for that bill in the 35th Guam legislature. So, and I did ask that questions many of times when we were in the Committee of the Whole, and it seems to never, so basically you spend the money without the authority. Thank
The
you,
money
Mr.
was
Chair.
spent under the authority of the Act.
Yeah, well, no. Read the bill, read
Okay,
the public law.
all right,
Thank you,
all
Mr.
right.
Chair.
And I think that quick question is done. Thank you, Ed. I know I did see the Senator Nelson, folks, my colleagues, quick questions.
Please, because
I'm
I
gonna
have
be here all
to,
day,
I have to go.
and then we're, okay. Senator Nelson, you have something, and then the speaker, and then we're gonna wrap this up. All right, Senator Nelson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to inquire, there's been several references made that we have to go into emergency session, or there's a timeline for this bill. Can that be explained why the immediate action is needed?
Let me explain it. If you look on the bill, which is Bill 217, Public Law 3562, on page 3 of that bill, it states very specifically at the very bottom, page 3, the legislature, line 25, el legislature in Guam may adopt, reject, or amend the plan by resolution, then it goes in page 4, by the plan by resolution passed by the majority of the legislature after 30 calendar days. Unless the Attorney Guam fails to act on the plan as submitted, the plan shall be deemed adopted. Okay, I got the bill, I have the hearing. And that's why I asked last week, all amendments so we can tweak this bill because the clock ends on January 7th. I didn't cause that. Okay, so
Thank
with
you,
that,
Mr. Chair.
we'll just move along. Thank you. And please, I'm going to ask again today. If I don't get it by the end of the day, any amendments, or as a matter of fact, by 12 o'clock, any amendments to this bill to make it right for everybody that everybody seems to have problems with, don't look at me. Look at yourself. All right? Thank you, Senator Nelson. Madam Speaker, you have a question you wanted to pose? And then I'm going to go ahead and close this hearing.
Yes, I have several follow-up questions. One is to the question that Senator Nelson just raised. And that is, so Mr. Byrne, this bill is quite different from an implementation plan. This bill that was sent to us by the governor includes a different appropriation language. It's an appropriation bill, really. It dictates some other things that are inconsistent with the previous law that was passed, Bill 217, Public Law 36-62. So if this bill is not passed by January 6th, what do you intend to do on that date, January 6th, as Department of Administration?
I hope
January 7th.
January 7th, yes. I hope I don't have to address that, first of all, because I'm confident that we will reach a resolution on this. But, you know, the previous bill required regulations to be submitted to the legislature in order to operate. If we don't have those regulations, I'm not really sure how we will operate. But again, that's a legal conclusion, and I have to take advice on that.
Yes, do you have
I think, Mr. Ed, Madam Speaker, pause, please. Ed, I think it needs to be clarified that you needed to submit the implementation plan in a bill form. Am I correct? Let's just be very specific, so we're not.
That is perfectly
ourselves,
correct.
right?
That's perfectly
Okay,
correct.
now,
Yes.
now go ahead and continue.
Yes, I guess I have some questions as to what actually can be implemented by default, including can we reappropriate by default? I can't not imagine that that's going to happen. The bill as submitted to us is, like I said, it far exceeds an implementation plan, the rules and regulations. The implementation schedule, it dictates what the committee's responsibilities are going to do. And the forms that are attached, those are more in line with an implementation plan. And I have no objections to any of those attachments except for the ones that I've pointed out, which are the confidentiality of the claims forms, and this secondary reviewer, I think, should be removed. But however, do you have any legal interpretation of this, or any direction on that, Mr. Byrne, for the January 7th? Or your action?
No, on my return, I will seek.
Right.
I will speak with the governor's legal advisor.
All right, because we are definitely going into session in the end of January, and we will be able to put this bill as amended by the committee onto that agenda, presumably, and resolve any issues as you've discussed. And I'm hoping that we can do that, and that that then, according to the terms of the original law, 30 days after that, you have a deadline to act by putting out an announcement of, you know, how the program's going to run, and that everybody can submit claims. So there's really a tight, by the end of February, you know, we should be receiving claims, and you know, then we can address that, whether there's 3 months that they have to apply or whether we can extend it longer. And I understand your concerns regarding that as well, Mr. Byrne. I also want to point out that so the transfer authority in Bill 217, that's now Public Law 3662, it authorized the funding to be transfer authority of the governor, right? And that is identical to the previous law that was passed, which was Bill 130, passed in October. Governor signed it, which also authorized that she would use transfer authority. As my other colleague pointed out, the prior law, you know, for a year ago, or the 75th Liberation War claims, was also the governor was going to use her transfer authority. And the same governor signed all of these laws. And so that's why I believe it was reasonable for us to ask, you know, why, if she signed these laws, you all came down and testified in favor of all of these bills, why now that funding source is not appropriate. And I just also wanted to put on the record, Mr. Chair, because, you know, we've been told transfers are not available to us at this point. So I went back, and I've only been a senator since the 34th Guam legislature, so I'm only going to talk about that period. But in the 34th Guam legislature, there were transfers in January 2017, May 2017, July 2017, November 2018. In the 35th Guam legislature, there were transfers in December 2019, April 2020. And during this term, there was a transfer in March 2021. And so I don't believe that transfer authority is going to restrict the governor from, you know, acting anytime prior to closure of the fiscal year, Mr. Chair. And I think that's just a little misleading. So I just wanted to put that on the record. And I want to thank everyone for their
May I
testimony.
comment, Mr.
I'm not
Chair?
asking any questions, Mr. Byrne. That was your comment that I'm responding to right there. Thank
But
you.
I don't think it was reflecting what I said still.
Mr. Burns, stand by, please. Madam Speaker, until you complete, please, and then we can move on.
Yes. So that's it, Mr. Chair. I think we still need to address that. We asked at the last hearing that they present this information to us, that the confidentiality plans, right? Why they were differing from the federal government. We asked at that last hearing, and I was expecting to see that at this hearing. It's not here. We had asked for something, you know. Oh, and the other thing that they pointed out today was, again, we're still talking about using FY21 balance of unappropriated available funding, but that's not what the bill says. It just says general fund. And so Mr. Byrne talks about the FY21 potential available funding. He also talks about the November CRER, which is FY22 funds. And I guess I would like to see that testimony in writing if they could update where exactly this money is available in a new fiscal note, since we have an amended bill, Mr. Chair. I would appreciate that prior to our session on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This pretty much wraps up this hearing. We're going to close this hearing. Reminder to all my colleagues. I know the speaker is asking for the end of the session, but the requirement of this bill was to be heard as to be in compliance with Bill 217-36, Public Law 36-62. We'll address the bill as we need to address it in session in January. Again, I remind everyone, there's been comments made, there's been clarity made. If you have any amendments, submit it. If you don't submit it, and we end up on the floor, we end up on the floor of it. But we'll see how this moves on. All right. That being said, the committee will still receive testimonies from the people, and then we'll move on. Senator Blas, did you have something? Because I'm closing already.
Yes, sir. If I could ask for the chair to get with legal counsel, again, it goes back to the law as implemented and the bill as presented, talks about two funding sources. Now, if that new funding source, as opposed to what the law says, if that wasn't in compliance or in congruence with the law, then has that timeline been met? Because I don't think so. And that's why, again, I'm continuing to do the research.
I will be getting.
The law says that you would put a plan. Okay, please. Thank you. That will help. That will help to resolve some of the concerns that we have with regards to the timelines. Because has the administration met the timeline? As from what I'm reading, it hasn't yet. Based on that, thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Blas. Moving along, we'll continue to receive testimonies. Please submit to the mail in the Guam legislature or through email, Senator joesaugustine.com. Corrections, joesaugustine@gmail.com. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending this virtual public hearing and for providing feedback and suggestion. The public hearing on Bill 230-36 COR is now adjourned. Time now is 10:27. Please, everyone, be safe, wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your distance, and have a happy new year. Thank you. It is now 10:27. Thank you.
Happy
Bye-bye.
New Year.